A conclusive overview, as featured in The Map is Indestructible. Part 2, starting with Section 3. What does it matter to learn that maps are indestructible? Won't this just make us hopeless? It might, but reasons for hope. We can shift intellectual life to faithful presence, encounterology, preparation, and so on, versus focus on debate, achieving certainty, avoiding surprise, planning, and the like. B, we are more aware of our natural tendency to end up in internally consistent systems like C words or ideologies and so on. C, we are less likely to discount entire projects because of bad results, say like democracy and rationality, because we realize everything is incomplete in its very consistency. Perhaps the projects are misguided, but error won't so readily totally deconstruct them. D, we are less likely to outsource everything to technology and machines, realizing that limitations of human reason could be a strength of it. For human reason can be positioned to be dialectical versus totalizing, and so situational, geometric versus syllogistic, algebraic, which we need for our sanity, Korbasky. E, we will be better positioned to identify game theory dynamics in conversation, debate, and the like, by which people position themselves to win versus realize what's best. The incentive to be stupid will also be limited, as described by Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his essay on stupidity is extraordinary. If everything is ultimately incomplete, with the I in parentheses, there is no winning in the sense of a complete and finished position. We are all forever exploring, the effort of which is a testament to our humanity. F, we will identify the map drive and be better positioned to channel drive away from mere map making towards, say, childhood at scale. G, we will aim for dialectics versus consensus or syllogism. H, we can realize that what Harold Bloom claims can be true about general characters in literature, so can be said about ideologies. They will sustain any theory we bring to them, as well or as badly as any other. I, we can realize that those who don't know coherence isn't correspondence will be easily manipulated and lack self-defense, alluding to Hume. And so on. To take seriously maps is to glimpse why there is reason to negate sublate AA to AB, and the results of this are far-reaching. They help any individual to solve his problems by himself, to his own and others' satisfaction. They also build upon an effective semantic foundation for a personal as well as for a national and international agreement and adjustment. Without this change, we might be forever stuck trying to debate and convince people, which will just be a disagreement between indestructible maps. For little, easily making it seem eventually like violence is the only way. But, to stress a question we have asked to introduce a distinction between maps and notions, have not ideologies faded? Few, if any, worship Zeus today. Doesn't that disprove that the map is indestructible? No, for decreasing popularity doesn't mean a genuine ideology becomes any less internally consistent. When an ideology is abandoned, it isn't necessarily through rational deconstruction, but because of some loss of stickiness, as described in Compelling by O.G. Rose. Ideologies aren't argued away so much as people stop stepping into them, either due to boredom, peer pressure, a loss of sight of the ideology's internal consistency, and so on. The map is indestructible, but that doesn't mean people must step into it or that they can't step out of it. But that's different from claiming the map can be destroyed. The map is possibly vagrant, sir, but not shredded. Also, maps can change and or be negated, sublated without compromising their essential structure. Even if it was perhaps realized that belief in Zeus was internally inconsistent, the system of ideas can change to save itself, which perhaps some would argue has happened. Though we don't worship Zeus, we still worship God. The particularities within and or of the ideology of theism have changed, but the ideology of theism continues to this day. Perhaps it could be said the ideology of belief in Zeus has just been renamed the ideology of theism, and that is still with us, only morphed. Similarly, capitalism can be sublated from an Austrian version to a Keynesian one, with the development occurring alongside the spread and growth of globalization, where more isolated societies could be Austrian, but not more interconnected ones, which could be argued as evidence not that capitalism has failed, but that it has evolved with global developments. Hence, the map continues. If maps aren't destroyed but left or negated, sublated, curved, the question becomes how might we aid, accelerate, and or incubate that process, which is important to ask so that problematic and or apocalyptic ideologies are corrected. For me, this is a role of the liminal web, the social coordination mechanism, and regular surprising encounter with otherness. Argument does not reduce stickiness with maps, while encounter and relationship can. It is more embodied and thus more like an experience than an idea. It is one thing to think Christianity is stupid, and another thing to tell a Christian that Christianity is stupid, and so on. A point which brings what Jonathan Haidt said to mind. Reason and emotion must both work together to create intelligent behavior, but emotion, a major part of the elephant, does most of the work. In the encounter, we don't simply encounter new ideas, but also train ourselves into the experience of a mode of being in the world with others. However, if we just relate to others without the right training, say in philosophy, metaphysics, and or the mental models discussed in O.G. Rose, then this encounter might not go well, hence the specific and particular way that the liminal web goes about organizing interaction as discussed at, say, Theory Underground. This naturally trains critical thinking versus just thinking, which better aligns with empathy as well. Ideas are not experiences, and it is experiences which are more likely to change the average person than ideas. Hence, a critical thinking, which might scale and spread, is one which is motivated by experience, and that means we need an infrastructure to make that spreadable experience possible. This could be the liminal web, a silk road on which we can encounter people and experience the need for empathy and critical thinking, versus simply sit back at home and know these acts are important. The liminal web can help accelerate the process of determining which map notions are actually maps versus deconstructible notions, from which point we can then determine how to best go about a faithful presence to help habituate us between these maps. Also, once we know that most deconstructible notions are off the table, we can focus on the work of faithful presence and not worry so much about deconstruction. We can focus and work on the next stage. How do we live with maps? Perhaps all of global pluralism boils down to this question, which arises from out of the problem of internally consistent systems. All of this must be expanded on in Belonging Again, 2.2 notably, and all of this basically means we cannot address the problem of internally consistent systems without an unveiling social infrastructure that can help work on stickiness. Right now, for the society at large, the closest model we have for that is the university system mixed with travel, but all of that is arguably restricted to an economic class, an age range, and a geography, making them limited in their effectiveness, not that they don't have a role. This too needs to be expanded on, but mechanisms of debate and deconstruction are not enough for maps. We require ways to work on stick, which require unveiling, considering Lovecraft with the craft in parentheses. And we need to do so at scale. Otherwise, negating sublating maps and better identifying incomplete notions from incomplete maps will prove wanting. For most of history, it would seem that all we could do was practically agree with Paul Vanin. And I quote, "Only historical reflection can clarify the programs of truth and reveal their variations. But this reflection is not a constant beacon and does not mark a stage on the route taken by humanity. The road twists and turns. The truth does not direct it toward the horizon, nor are its vagaries molded on the powerful contours of an infrastructure. The road winds hazardly. Most of the time, the travelers do not care. Each one believes that his road is the true one, and the turns that he sees others take scarcely disturb him. But on rare occasion, it happens that a bend in the road permits the travelers to look back and see a long stretch of the road in all its zigzags. Some travelers of such a temperament that this sight moves them. The retrospective version speaks truly, but it does not make the road any more false, since the road could not be true. Therefore, the flashes of retrospective lucidity are not very important. They are simply accidents of the journey." But now things have changed. We have a liminal web, a social coordination mechanism. Glimmers can be more regular. We can habituate ourselves anew. The girdle point is where a map fails to be the territory, which is also the point that makes maps indestructible, in that we decide what constitutes the necessary girdle point in our worldview, and thus can always define away a critique. As I believe is the case with postmodernism, the public and widespread realization of the Gödel point is when we especially must shift into a new logic by which we approach different worldviews and beliefs, which locates the point of onto-epistemological possibility in the place of encounter itself. Anywhere else will simply lack the conditions necessary for thought to be possible that doesn't ultimately just prove captured by maps and unable to really take seriously that the true isn't the rational. This is what I have in mind when I talk about faithful presence, indebted to Dr. James Hunter. And as we must expand on in reconstructing A as A, it is only to the degree we are committed to that space of surprising encounter of the face that we can hope to address the problem of internally consistent systems. We must think where we encounter, or we will not be thinking new conditions of possibility. Time and time again, until the end of time, all while enclosed and unable to tell, will simply confirm and reconfirm that the map is indestructible. Avoiding this mistake is what the liminal web makes possible, but we must commit ourselves to it and be faithfully present. If indeed the map is indestructible, has shown that worldviews based on non-dialectical logic lead to indestructible systems we cannot escape. Ideologies, see words, and so on. And if the conflict of mind has shown that autonomous rationality ultimately eats itself, as does society, which is A, following belonging again, then the case has been made for the desperate need to move into A-B thinking, both from the examination of autonomous rationality proving self-effacing, and in the same proving the case regarding society as a whole. Though it cannot be proven with certainty, this gives us reason to believe a new onto-epistemology is needed with a corresponding socioeconomic order, one we can think of as a B, which will be the work of reconstructing A as A and belonging again, notably part 2. Having made our arguments for why there is reason to believe these efforts are worth trying, we will turn next in our efforts to make these cases, one from an epistemological angle, which leads to ontology and thus onto epistemology, reconstructing A as A. The other from a sociological angle, which orbits the question of scale, belonging again, and then from an aesthetic angle, the fate of beauty, with the absolute choice being a Hegelian take on all of these works. Time will tell if we succeed. Ross Bird of Patient Kingdom made the tremendous point that Eden was good but not perfect. It was not yet perfect because it was not yet complete. So we might speak of AA and maps. They are good, but they are not complete. And if the good is maintained when it is in an age of moving into the next phase, it will become bad. Overfitting and underfitting are often our troubles, far more than right or wrong. Bird notes that the logic of the Bible can be thought of as tension between holiness and inclusion, and God, in a sense, has a problem of God to deal with, which is that God seeks a relationship with us and to include us with God, but God would destroy us. And so God has to unveil, with the UN in parentheses, God's self at a rate and in a way we can handle, and all of history can be seen as the story of this unveiling. A similar logic is at play in Hegel, in his view of history. And what we can say here is that if we didn't experience AA, we couldn't be prepared for AB. We'd be overwhelmed and destroyed. In this way, critically, we must not think that maps are a mistake. No, they have been historically necessary. It's just that now, in this moment of global pluralism, we must negate sublate into AB. This is a move of the good toward perfection, but if the move is denied, the good will prove overfit and self-effacing. And of course, Bird writes, this is not merely a vision of the future. The beauty of the Christian understanding of perfection is that it's not just something that will happen, but something that is happening now. Section 5. In Volume 1 of The True Isn't the Rational, we discuss the conflict of mind, which is where epistemic possibility comes in conflict with epistemic responsibility, which is to say, there are situations in the world where we can feel compelled by a sense of intellectual ethics to try to do that which is beyond what we are intellectually capable of undertaking and experiencing, meaning we can be compelled by ethics to suffer auto-cannibalism. Belonging Again, Part 1 also discussed the conflict of society, which is where social responsibility comes in conflict with social possibility. And ultimately, the book argued that societies are naturally organized and founded to manage this potentially self-effacing contradiction. In terms of the mind and the society, at the foundation of the human is a problem that facing and realizing has proven dangerous. Indeed, I think the average person is increasingly experiencing both of these conflicts, even if they don't realize it. And the result has been a spread of mental health problems, nihilism, popularism, a dismissing of rationality, and collapse of social bonds, what some have called the meta-crisis. Existential anxiety has increased, tempting us with ways to escape it in the form of totalitarianism, isolationism, and worse, temptations that seem more difficult to resist by the day. The map is indestructible focuses on the role of ideology, C-word, worldview, internally consistent systems, and so maps, and how these prove to be temptations for escaping our conflicts, while then turning around and worsening those conflicts. They are ultimately traps, but they are also indestructible traps. Once we enter them, there is no way to escape them according to their own internal logics. What must we do? Well, we must leave behind and or negate sublate, not so much disprove forms of autonomous rationality, but how do we do that at scale? This is the question and concern of belonging again, part 2. We create maps to be sane, but these models risk our sanity in ways described by Korbisky, in that maps present the world as what it is not. Algebra instead of geometry, identity versus situation, representation versus territory, consistency as if it were coherence. We must move to AB, but AB is odd and unnatural. Thinking is not what we think it is. The model of reality in which thinking is just trying to correspond with phenomenon isn't totally false, but problematically incomplete. Thinking is not primarily in the business of making sure that its idea of a cat is equivalent to the thing that is a cat. Rather, thinking is in the business of feeling like its idea of a cat is equivalent to the thing that is a cat. Thinking works to mitigate existential anxiety before it prioritizes accuracy. C.S. Peirce was right, which means thinking prioritizes coherence, gaining full coherence, and it will heavily sacrifice correspondence to achieve that goal, as thinking can, because certainty is mostly impossible, as described in Uncertainty by O.G. Rose, and so thinking never has to fully face what it is doing. It would be wrong to say that correspondence doesn't play a role in thinking at all, for there is a difference between a hallucination and a falsifiable idea, which has been challenged 1,000 times, like a ball falling when released. No, we can't escape Hume's critique of natural law here in favor of constant conjunction, so we can never entirely verify things, but that doesn't mean we cannot gain strong reason to believe in something based on patterns, probability, experience, and the like. Still, even acknowledging this difference between certainty and confidence draws into question the possibility or meaning of correspondence, and furthermore, this can lead us to realizing that ideas of correspondence can contribute to ideology, closed-mindedness, and the like. So, though we must use the dialectic between coherence and correspondence to function according to understanding following Hegel, what do we talk about when we talk about correspondence after realizing or reasoning that there are inadequacies with this dialectic? What do we end up with once we speculate beyond the dialectic, thus moving into a fuller movement of Hegelian thought? Well, it would seem we end up with a more participatory mode of being and thinking in the world, which is to say we arrive at not merely a new epistemology or ontology, but an onto-epistemology, which means we move into reconstructing A as A and the absolute choice. If we realize that we cannot seek correspondence like we traditionally have, this alone can help us work against the tendency to fall into C-words, ideologies, and other maps without realizing it, for we come to see ourselves as more so participating in our structures of knowing and the way the world presents itself to us. We realize we are always at risk of self-enclosing ourselves in a fabrication, and this will help us be more self-skeptical and aware of how the feeling that this is true can be in service of leading us into something false. Why, though, are we so prone to fall into unifying maps that are so difficult to escape? In addition to the desire to avoid existential anxiety, like C.S. Peirce taught on, as Loretto points out, experience itself is unifying, which is to say we experience everything in experience as one, a point touched on in, ironically, the paper by O.G. Rose. This being the case, perhaps perception primes us to be self-enclosed, monotheorists, to approach the world as if a theory of everything is valid, thanks paradoxically to the very perception which suggests an alternative to thinking, which also suggests the problem of dream equality discussed in 2.2. To allude to Lorento's point again, everything that humans can understand must be experiential, which means there is a unifying principle which always applies, everything we know we experience. And it is this universality of experience that might make monotheism natural. We think to return to the world, perhaps. As discussed in On Thinking and Perceiving by O.G. Rose, we indeed perceive the world as if it was one, for experience is taken in as unified and singular. But to comprehend what we take in, we must break it up into smaller parts by thinking about it. However, in thinking always being about the perceived, thinking is still toward that which is experienced as singular, as if that singularity is what thinking wants. In this way, thinking and perception relate in a manner that perhaps phenomenologically trains us into oneness and monotheism. In this, we see how a tragedy is built into thinking itself. It is toward a singularity that to understand it must break that singularity apart. But that doesn't change the fact that thinking is always toward that which is experientially one, seeking it and even wanting it. So primed, it seems easy and natural for thinking to then become monotheoristic, for this is a wish fulfillment that thinking holds in seeking to overcome the tragedy of how it breaks the world into smaller parts to grasp it, the problem of dream equality from 2-2, of which the problem of internally consistent systems relates. Desire might structure thinking just like it structures us. Thought is always towards something that is practically unified in perception, the world, and so this suggests that thought, which is often, if not always, of the world, should be like that. The way the world is suggests also what thought should be like. But thought is that which gains intelligibility by breaking the world up. And so if thought tries to be like unified experience, it is stuck in a self-feeding irony, trying to be one through acts which necessarily divide. Thinking can then become pathological in its Sisyphean failure, and in not wanting to face this fate, thinking can turn to maps which deny the dialectic between the true and the rational in favor of a self-effacing autonomous rationality. But that fate can be hidden behind the map, which helps thought feel like its efforts are not in vain, that it can gain and become like the oneness that characterizes not only perception, but some of the most important and meaningful experiences of our lives, beauty, all, love, and so on. We seem to naturally long for experiences of oneness and unity, which could be associated with escaping lack, and pure perception and experience seem to experience just thought, and yet thinking can only ever break up and divide. Oneness seems possible given moments and experiences of love and beauty, and if I can turn off my brain for a moment, it also seems like I can experience it. Why can't I think it then? It doesn't seem fair, and the goal can always seem right in front of us, and yet it is always so far away. Faced with this tragic irony, thought can generate a protest, the map, and better, worse yet, thought makes that map indestructible. We are then locked within the oneness of the C word, the ideology, the worldview. Thought gets a likeness of what it wants, at the cost of self-effacement. Thought lacks unity in its very nature of generating divisions, distinctions, categories, and so on, but similarly so does desire, which can seek to escape lack with objects of desire. Thinking and desire are similar in that both seem to seek a oneness that pure perception and experience seem to have access to, not that they technically do, please note, that's another question. And in thinking and desire seemingly always being toward what we perceive and experience, both almost seem arranged to be constantly mocked. Suffering this mockery, desire and thinking indirectly work together to generate their protest, the masterpiece of both desire and thinking, the map. The map is perhaps how thinking and desire get back at perception and experience and become like them, suggesting even that they are superior to perception and experience in that thought and desire are able to be toward what isn't directly present, the big other, for example. Both thus gain oneness and validity and seeing through secrecy and beholding the truth. Then thinking and desire make this map something perception and experience cannot overturn and deconstruct in making it indestructible, and so thinking and desire achieve their victory, but at a heavy cost. We hence sink into anxiety, C-word thinking, self-enclosed, unable to escape, suffering the revenge of thinking and desire against perception and experience. I am making it sound as if the brain is engaged in a war against itself, with thinking and desire on one side, which for me are always linked as heart-mind, and perception and experience on the other. And indeed, I think there is truth to the schema. If we are to think dialectically, as I think is required for us, to then speculatively reason into the absolute choice and the like, we must place thinking and perception in relation with one another, which is to say we keep them from trying to dominate the other. Otherwise, we will end up in maps that will prove difficult to escape precisely because we will see no reason to escape them. After all, we have our oneness and truth. Isn't that everything we could want? Indeed, thinking engages in many tricks against us, and we must learn many mental models to master it so that it does not master us. The hope of O.G. Rose is to provide many of these models, but the question is open on why we should learn these models and for what reason. Ultimately, it will be to put thinking in its proper bounds and keep it from trying to be like perception, which is to say to keep thinking from seeking a oneness and map that saves it from incompleteness and lack. If we cannot accomplish this goal, thinking will end up eating itself, as it seems so prone and bent on doing. We must think to control thinking so that it hones and relates to perception as a friend, not something to dominate and ignore. Rationality needs non-rationality, as non-rationality needs rationality. Apart, the two will fail, and the world might prove destructively shaped by that failure. Failing into totalitarianism, C-word thinking, anxiety, and the like. For the rest of The Map is Indestructible, please purchase the book on Amazon. All purchases and reviews are deeply appreciated. And for more by O.G. Rose, please visit the website, ogrose.com. And thank you so much for your time.